In July, I will be interning with L'Arche in London. L'Arche is an international charity that provides support to adults with learning disabilities. In addition to providing basic needs, large communities have established programs to attend to their residents' emotional and spiritual lives as well. The two core ideas that this organization aims to spread are that people with learning disabilities have a great deal to contribute to society, and that by living within a diverse community that includes people with disabilities, we can open ourselves up to being challenged and to grow. It was founded in 1964 by Jean Vanier after he became aware of the thousands of people with learning disabilities who were institutionalized in France. Jean took a radical step by inviting two men to leave an institution and live with him. This invitation was so radical because people with mental disabilities had been so long dehumanized by the UK law and cultures. Throughout World War II, mentally disabled people were institutionalized under the Mental Deficiency Act, which was passed in 1913. This act categorized disabled people into four categories: idiots, imbeciles, feeble-minded persons, and moral imbeciles. This was replaced with the Mental Health Act of 1959, which abolished the distinction between psychiatric hospitals and other types of hospitals to deinstitutionalize mental health. Although this law was mainly concerned with mental illnesses rather than mental disabilities, which were still largely treated within institutions, all people with mental disabilities were no longer required by law to be detained in institutions. Nevertheless, many people remained in this type of treatment because of how society viewed them. From the 1960s to the 90s, reporters around London published shocking information and interviews about the quality of life that existed within these institutions, which led the UK to recognize that it needed to change. From this era came new legislation, such as the Disabled Persons Act in 1986, which provided resources and consultations to best support people with mental and physical handicaps in living their lives, and anti-discrimination acts in the 1990s. In 2005, the UK legislature passed the Mental Capacity Act, which ensured that people with learning disabilities have the right to make their own decisions if they have the capacity to do so. This requires families to support the decisions made regardless of whether or not they agree with them, and to provide an individual with the most support so that they can make the most educated decision for themselves. The UK's 2001 white paper titled Valuing People revised the code of practice such that it now includes principles of rights, independence, choice, and inclusion. This means that the UK will be more dedicated to providing people who have mental disabilities with the most resources to live their lives, such as housing, employment, direct financial support, and more control over the choices that affect them. Amongst these improvements was the expansion of large communities, growing from Jean Vanier's first community in a small house in Choisy-le-Breuil, France, to communities all around the world, now including 149 different communities international, with over 200 residents in the UK alone. The United States has had a very similar trajectory as the UK on how we treat and view people with mental disabilities. In the early 20th century, we too banished people with any mental illness or disability to institutions of terrible conditions, but have since passed many laws that mirror those in the UK, such as the Americans with Disability Act in 1990 and countless policies about patient consent that continue to be optimized by the Mental Health America Public Policy Committee. One of the main problems with treatment of people with mental disabilities is that often these disorders are accompanied by many physical complications. People with Down syndrome, for instance, usually suffer from many physical and muscular ailments. Additional treatment, such as physical therapy, is mostly covered by Medicaid in the US, although the quality of care is not always the best. Likewise, the UK is also struggling to find additional support for the mentally disabled within the NHS funding, which typically does not cover physical therapy. Within the US, L'Arche has 19 communities. At its heart, L'Arche is dedicated to providing daily support to its residents. Its communities recognize that while some residents prefer to live in a group home with other people, other residents choose to be supported in a more independent environment. L'Arche makes sure to help individuals and their families find the right balance of support and lifestyle for every person. In addition to coordinating a world outside of the community, such as employment and voluntary opportunities, L'Arche takes care to provide daily activities for its residents within the community. This includes gardening, art and design workshops, music and dance therapy, individual and group yoga, and carpentry. Although Larch is not an explicitly religious organization, grace is said before each meal and an optional silent prayer follows dinner every night. As a volunteer, I am really looking forward to spending time in and interacting with the Larch community in London. As Lydia, communications coordinator at Larch, said in my interview, working with people with mental disabilities opens your eyes to a world you wouldn't normally pay attention to. You are challenged to see a new way of doing things, and in doing so, you are truly able to learn about yourself. What do you think are the benefits of providing support to people with disabilities as a nonprofit as opposed to in the private sector? And what can be the drawbacks?